you are going to make it tonight?
Yeah.
Good. Good to
Uh-huh.
know. Okay.
Are you calling it as a council liaison or as a?
For now.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. First thing we'll do is look at the meeting minutes. We've already approved the June 11th, so the August 13th and September 24th minutes. We'll have a chance to.
Did we approve the June 11th, or did we ask for more detail?
I thought because Rita wasn't here, we put it aside until she could be here. This was
I thought we voted for it.
Oh, okay, I couldn't remember.
The first
I know
time-
we've seen them before, I just couldn't remember if we.
Yeah, we saw it last meeting.
I thought we decided to table it until.
I went back and checked it, and it had been approved.
Oh,
Yeah.
God, for once, my memory didn't fail me. So I watched part of the last county council meeting, and I noticed that some people don't speak into the microphone, and so I don't know how large an audience there is out in wherever goes, but,
Bigger than you think. You would be surprised.
uh-oh. So let's
Important for the public
behave
record,
ourselves
too.
tonight, Cricket.
I
I'll
always
try.
do.
I'll work on it.
But anyway, it's really irritating when people are making presentations and they turn from the microphone and they speak towards the audience and you can't hear them, or they don't speak into the microphone. So if we can kind of try to remind each other to speak into the microphone, that would make life much better. Okay, how about the August 13th minutes? Have you all had a chance to look at those?
I didn't notice anything that needed updating. Thanks. Okay, speaking of the YouTube, thanks for putting the time codes in there. That's definitely helpful if people ever need to reference.
Yeah, so that was part of my training with Eve, yeah, from the city. So that's been helpful, and I'll just continue to integrate a little bit more of that stuff.
Very good.
So I move that we approve the August 13th minutes.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the August 13th minutes.
I'll second.
Been seconded by Abigail Scott. All in favor? It's unanimous. Bob is not here. He may have mentioned that he was going to be gone this week, but I don't remember.
He had a family emergency.
Oh.
He had to fly to Oakland last minute.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I thought, I should have checked closer, but I thought that you were CC'd on that email, so my apologies for not forwarding that.
Just going to tell you that in the study committee meeting, the chairman always says the names of everybody who's here and the person who isn't for
That's a good
the
idea.
TV show. So I just thought I'd let you know that, that all the members present and those absent or whatever. That's how they do it. So that, because you can't really tell who people are from the screen unless you know where they sit. If that makes sense.
Good point. Okay, with that said, everyone is present and all the commissioners are present except for Bob O'Brien. Okay. How about the September 24th meeting minutes? Would anybody be interested in making a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the September 24th minutes.
Kevin, you second it? Okay, all who agree with this motion? It's unanimous. Is there anybody here who would like to speak to us about a topic that is not on the agenda? Okay. Do any commissioners have any conflicts of interest, or have you had any ex parte communications about the one action item that you have tonight,
No.
No.
or anything else?
Well, I went and looked at it again. Other than that, no.
It's good for you.
It's pretty high on the back end, and that concerns me about height. So,
Okay, very good. Well, that being the case, staff, you ready to take on the Tierra Fuego HDHO development application, formerly Net Zero, located at 3827 and 3859 Spanish Valley Drive?
Sure. And I would invite Eric Flume up to the table as the applicant, should the planning commission have any questions, or if you want to address them any further after the county staff report. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through the staff report for this application. You have seen it in a public hearing, and there were several conditions associated with the staff recommendation of approval. And because of those, the Planning Commission encouraged the applicant to make all the changes to the master plan in advance of a Planning Commission vote. The applicant has made all of those changes to the master plan. It is in satisfactory condition for moving forward to the county council. The applicant did submit yet another iteration of the master plan today with names on the private access tracts. I don't think that those are material changes, that are important to your action tonight, but just so you know that has already taken place, as have the updates to the application materials and the associated documents. So those all now reflect Tierra Fuego, which is the current name of the project. So 10-lot subdivision being proposed as a high-density housing overlay development. The properties at 3827 and 3859 Spanish Valley Drive, just north of the intersection with Lake Lane. Like I said, the master plan reflects all of the requested changes from staff and the county engineer, and I think is a pretty good project. I will note that the applicant took to heart the conversations around height in the vicinity of this project, and has added a restriction to their master plan that the buildings would be limited to 2 stories or 28 feet, I believe. Maybe, what did we settle on, 28 feet? Which is the maximum height in the most restrictive zone districts in Grant County. So I think that's pretty good, and would encourage you to forward a favorable recommendation. Just to note, we have not received any additional public comment on this, so you've seen and heard everything.
Great. Eric, I do have a question or two, so if you want to come up, that way the viewing audience can also hear your answers.
Quick question for staff beforehand, just so
Sure.
we have some context for these added materials that were handed out. Is it just
It's just the name change
Just the
on
name
the
change.
streets, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Or, well, added to the streets.
Added to the, right,
Yeah.
that was referenced in the packet, but
Correct.
no additional changes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No layout changes or anything like that.
Okay.
So I typically don't go through the title reports because Cricket's here and she scrutinizes them with a fine-tooth comb, but I did notice that your title on one of the parcels was subject to a previous subdivision. Can you explain what implications that might have on your development?
One or both of them. I think they're both in the same subdivision.
Well,
I think it's a 3-lot subdivision.
yes.
and-
I mean,
yeah,
is
so
there-
two are-
Was there anything in that, it references a page number in the recorder's office, and I didn't take the time to go look. I was just wondering what that was. Was it an easement, a utility easement, or do you know what the title was subject to?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Garrett, that book and page number may be referring to the plat that, or the Reed subdivision. I don't know specifically if that's the one that you were thinking of or referring to, but that would be my guess. It is, 2 of his lots are 2 of the 3-lot subdivision, so.
Which is the
That's-
Reed subdivision. Do you have a page number in the title report
It's like,
or in the packet
they're like around page 53 in the packet.
of the packet?
Or I'm sorry, they really start on like page 45.
Right, I see that the title report does, but is there a specific element of the title report that you want to call attention to?
Well, I just wondered, and I didn't bring it up the last meeting during public hearing, but are you gonna vacate like one subdivision or say in the title of this, I mean, that'll be on John's end anyway, not in the reporter's office, probably a replat of Reed subdivision. Now, I also, within the Terra, whatever, also a replat of lots 1 and 2 of Reed subdivision, but I'm sure that John will, because you're moving one legal description within another, and it would usually say it in the title of the subdivision. But I'm sure John Cortez will bring that up. So you might want to check with him.
Yeah, we can
You
check
get
on that.
close, because it's being taken into, and that happens all the time, but subdivisions are within another, but it usually says in the title, also contains a replat of lots 2 and 3 of Reed subdivision or something. Something to that order.
Okay.
So that whoever's doing the search can follow it there.
Digitally, oh goodness, 49. Garrish is looking at item
So I'm
10
trying
under
to see it on my
exceptions on the Schedule B Part 2
No,
of
it's
the
okay.
title insurance.
I just, there, see, there's the Reed subdivision.
No.
Yeah. No, it's good.
Yeah, I didn't know if that was just something the
Referring to and
the title
it says
company
matters.
put in there just to cover all their bases.
Well, they cover all their bases, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
It's number 10 of the exceptions.
Can you read it to me, Garish?
Page 50.
Do you
I've got
have it?
I've got it right here. It was exception 10, matters pertaining to the subdivision plat of Reed subdivision in the southeast quarter, northeast quarter, section 27.
That's just the description for Reed subdivision. So once you move it over into the other one, then you're merging them.
So that's what matters pertaining to means.
So what we'll do is just check to make sure that there aren't any stipulations shown on that subdivision final plat that would affect this development. Yeah, I mean, it's it's clear throughout the title report that these are lots 2 and 3 of the Reed subdivision, so that's not a surprise to anybody. But we'll just double check to make sure that there aren't any stipulations that would affect this.
Yeah, you'll want people to have clear title so they can search it out, so.
Well, I don't believe that there's a problem with clear title. I
No,
mean, he
it's-
owns the lots. It's
Yeah.
just being able to make it merge.
Not clear title, future title investigations easy, so that it doesn't go to a dead end. Any other questions for staff or for Eric?
just have a very simple question when I was looking at the packet. It was, I only saw one master plan, and my question is, are the 10 units spread out over 2 acres?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you want me to stick that for you too? If you,
There's an extra copy of the map if you'd like to see.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, 5 on each lake, 5 on each 1 lot acre.
Okay,
So you're developing at a density of 5 units per acre, even though it's in the HDHO 10.
and you remember what the council just did?
Yeah, so the recommendation here is the HDHO 10. We don't have an HDHO 5. Before I say that, maybe I better double check. Maybe we do.
We used to.
What was it that the council did that we're referencing?
The Peakview subdivision, it was in an HDHO.
It was in the HDHO 25 district, but because they were only requesting density at a level of 6.3 units per acre, the council actually applied the HDHO 10. So we do have an HDHO 5, so that would be an option for the planning commission to recommend as an alternative to the HDHO 10. And the council can take that recommendation as well. The application is still for the HDHO 10 right now, so the applicant would have to determine if, they were comfortable receiving an HDHO 5 designation, which would, make it more difficult down the road to come back with a new master plan at a potentially higher density. Any amendments to a master plan do still require council action in the form of, public hearings at planning commission and public hearing and action at county council, but it, basically puts the developer and the community on notice that the council wants to prohibit that option in the future.
Well, we could maybe cover that with our recommendation that we're recommending the subdivision as designed tonight. And if Eric decided he wanted higher density, he could either go to the county council, and who might kick it back to us to look at it again. So, but the designations are maps, and I don't think we're in the business of recommending changes to the maps, but maybe we are, if that's what we're talking about.
I mean, I think Jalen just pointed out that the county council in a very similar situation elected to apply the, an HDH district with a lower number that fit the actual master
I
plan.
understand that, Kevin,
So,
but are they changing the HDHO map?
No.
no,
It's just like
it's
a,
just an eligibility map. It doesn't affect the zoning until we make a designation.
So,
Any other questions? Anybody care to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move to send a favorable recommendation to the Grand County Council for applying the High-Density Housing Overlay District 5 to the parcels located at 3827 and 3859 Spanish Valley Drive. And I don't believe we need the conditions since those are Spanish Valley Drive.
I'll second.
So we have a motion to apply the HDHO 5 to this parcel. It's been seconded by Kevin.
2 parcels.
2 parcels.
2 parcels. Thank you. It's been approved by Kevin. Been seconded by Kevin. Any discussion?
If you have anything first, Emily?
No?
I'll just say my usual, I do have misgivings about, increased density this far south, but I think the county council decided to place these zones out here, and this isn't really pushing the boundaries of what was specified in the eligibility zone. If it were a larger thing, I'm not sure I would be in favor of it because of the location, but this is small compared to other things we're doing, so.
Any other discussion? Well, I think I might have heartburn over trying to change the zoning map or the overlay map in this fashion. It seems like if we need to relook at the overlays, we should look at the map. We ought to do that, not on an individual project basis. But that said, I think I'm probably going to vote for this recommendation. Yes, Kevin?
I don't think we're changing any maps. I think when we draw an eligibility zone for HDH 15, I think implicitly that also means it could be a 10 or a 5, which are more restrictive. So, it just wouldn't make sense to say that, someone in an eligibility district for some high-density thing is not eligible for lower ones. So I don't think we're changing any maps, and I don't think we're really changing any policy.
So in the future, if we think the density is, for the location or for whatever reason, is too high, the way to approach that would be to say, no, we don't like it. You're even though the overlay allows a certain density, we think you should go for a lower density and send it back to work
Yeah.
on it.
Yeah, and that's already happening with the
Yeah.
master plans, which have a much, sort of finer control over density. For example, in the, what's the one behind the hotel?
I was gonna say.
Viewgate.
Yeah.
I mean, they asked for a very large number of units, and I think it's come down because the county council didn't want to approve that many units. Now, that didn't involve.
But the map is still the same.
Right, but I think
Yeah, but you can't piece,
I think you're confusing zoning designations with eligibility districts. We're not changing the eligibility district map. The map that we approved months ago for HDH is still in effect with no changes.
Correct.
I'd add that it's much more cost efficient to deal with it on a per parcel basis. I think we made our best judgment when looking at the eligibility districts, and as we have potential developers come, we can make a recommendation at that point with a little bit more scrutiny. And also in this case, we have an applicant who is putting a plan in front of us that is within the boundaries of a more restricted unit. So I think the example you gave is a slightly different scenario than in this case where the applicant's coming to us with a density of 5 per acre, so it just makes sense to me.
2.
5 per acre,
2 lots.
2 lots,
lots.
5 homes per acre. Yep, 5 lots.
Okay. Any other discussion?
Sorry,
I
yes,
think
2
that
lots. Thank you.
this probably would tend to make the neighbors happier too, with some of the stuff that was brought up last time.
And it seems like the developer, this doesn't restrict the developer beyond what they're proposing, so why not?
What the heck?
Sorry, I don't mean to be so flippant about that. That's not the way I consider things. But.
Okay, so, we have a motion that's been seconded. I'll call for the question. The motion is to recommend to the county council that the 2 properties at 3827 and 3859 Spanish Valley Drive, which are included in the high-density overlay at 10 units per acre be recommended to the county council at 2 units,
No, five.
so-
HDHO
5 units.
HDHO
HDHO 5, thank you. 5 units per acre. And was there anything else in your motion?
No, because the other conditions were covered by the update
Yeah.
to the streets on the master plan.
Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous, Kenny.
Thank you.
Also, I see that it says in your legal description, the lots, and I knew I'd read that, that's why I wasn't worried about it. But when the plat's done, in the name of the plat, your surveyor, I'm sure, will say a replat of lots 1 and 2 Reed subdivision. So, I think you're good.
Thank you, Eric.
John
Thank you.
Cortez would be who to find out for sure. He's the recorder, what he requires.
Okay, the next item is scheduling the planning commission vacancy interviews on December the 10th. Do we have any more applicants?
Not yet. The application window closes December 1st,
Yeah.
so there's still, more than 2 weeks to apply. So if you know anyone interested, consider putting that out to them.
And how many seats?
Well, Bob O'Brien has indicated that he would like to reapply. He will still need
Okay.
to be reappointed, and Cricket has indicated that she is not going to reapply.
So there are 2 vacancies coming up. Yeah, I would echo what Zachariah said. If you know anybody that has any interest at all in doing this as civic duty, please encourage them to apply before December 1st or 2nd. I think the 2nd is the Monday.
Yeah, I might also say, for those folks who are just indulging us on YouTube, anybody who's also interested in getting involved with local politics down the road, be it the city council, county council, or some other, position, the planning commission is a great venue to learn, some of the most critical components of local government action, and you get exposure to so many intersecting issues that it's a great place to start.
So is there anything else that you had in mind as far as scheduling goes?
Just to confirm with you all that was an acceptable date. We don't have a second meeting in December, so the only alternative would be to schedule a special meeting, which I don't recommend, for something like this. But perhaps you want to talk about approach during the interviews. For whatever it's worth, my recommendation is that you have a set of questions that every applicant responds to. I think that it's okay to have some off the cuff, but not to the extent that it unfairly, advantages or disadvantages, different applicants. So.
I recall that being part of the conversation around our bylaws 4 months ago.
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
3 months ago.
That's true.
Though I haven't looked at them, so I just recommend that we all revisit the language
Yeah.
and confirm that it was intended to ensure that we were all asking the same questions. But I thought there was some conversation about submitting the questions beforehand or something like that, and then that was cut down, but I don't recall. So it would be nice to just revisit that and just have a recommendation from you.
Yep.
I can pull
Ahead
it
of
up
time.
right now. Hold on just a sec.
Thanks, Zachary. While you're doing that, do we have a meeting on the 26th of this month?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so, but I feel like I saw that reference.
So it is referenced later on. We do need to have a conversation about scheduling the public hearing for the overnight accommodations standards. So
Okay.
that does come up
We
later.
can come back to that then.
I'm sorry, is there a thermostat setting? Am I the only one who's freezing?
It's on cold right now. Are you cold?
I'm cold, but I don't want to be the only one who's
It's
asking
cool.
for it. Okay,
It's
thank
very
you.
cool. I don't have a jacket on. I thought it was
Kenny.
just because, no, I have a sweater, so I thought it was just me.
I was going to just bear through it, and I was shivering.
Okay, so this is what the bylaws say. The commission shall interview qualified candidates and provide a recommendation to the county council. At the start of each interview, candidates will be given 3 minutes to briefly introduce themselves and to provide relevant information as to background and experience. During the interview process, commissioners are encouraged to ask questions which verify a candidate's experience and eligibility of meeting requirements of service. Commissioners shall ask the same questions of each candidate. After responding to those questions, commissioners may ask the applicant additional clarifying questions if necessary.
And
So Emily, are you suggesting that if we have questions that we share them amongst ourselves ahead of time?
so
that we don't have duplicates?
if I recall from that conversation, while we didn't adopt it into the bylaws, somebody brought up the concern of somebody having duplicate questions or someone having a question but other areas not being covered. And so I thought that there was a recommendation generally that we pool those ahead of time so that everyone has a chance to look at them and think about what we might be missing. And I don't think that would be burdensome to just collect those by email.
What's funny is, and it's sad funny, not funny, haha, is that usually we have 6 or 8 that you're figuring, and we're going to be lucky if we get 2 or
Yeah.
3. You know what I mean? So before we've asked several questions, and we each picked a question, so they weren't the same. And we each asked that same question again before when we did it. So, but I don't know that we're going to have a lot of questions to try to narrow it down if we don't have any applications.
And this
I wouldn't write off the possibility of several applications coming in between now and the end of the
I would hope.
application
Yeah.
window.
I would
You
hope
know,
so.
It's kind of a Moab style.
Sure. Well, and this conversation in and of itself will probably create a little bit of urgency even amongst yourselves to, put some feelers out. My recommendation would be that you submit questions to our office beforehand via email, and we can pool those together and send them out to the Planning Commission to ensure completeness or complete coverage of the, sort of range of issues you want to cover.
So if we got those
Perhaps
to
if
you,
Kenny, if you want to put a deadline on the shared calendar to submit questions by, I'm just going to say a week from now, because the longer you put it off, the less likely it is to occur, and it's not going to take too much thought on your behalf to just send us 1 or 2 questions.
And I can send out an email reminder about that one
Sure.
also.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, the way we've done in the past is each commission member ask a question or 2 questions. In this case, if the questions are all kind of pre-identified, I don't know that we need to go around the room to ask the questions. One of us just interrogates the applicant nicely. Okay. So Kenny will send out a email reminder to us, and we should think of really good questions and send them back by next Tuesday. Okay, establishing the 2020 meeting schedule. It has been suggested that we look at when we meet to and see if we want to change our meeting date. One suggestion was we have our meetings on the same week that the county council meets. For those of us who like to attend or need to attend both meetings for some reason, and it would be less burdensome scheduling-wise if people are going to be out of town to meet the same week. it was suggested that if we do that, that we change our meeting date to Mondays, the day before the council meetings. But thinking back to when we made the change, I think it was when Mary and Zachariah were, Mary was still here, and there was some concern that the Planning Commission listened to from staff saying that they had night meetings to attend, and splitting it up would make it easier on staff or make their home life better or whatever. So I think we can just have a free-for-all as to what people's thoughts are, and if you want to go first, Zachariah or Kenny, if you have any feelings about the pros and cons of keeping the meeting as they are or changing the meeting date, let us know what do you think?
I can comment on that last part. The change was from Wednesday to Tuesday, and in that conversation, I did advocate for moving the day of the meeting from Wednesday to Tuesday, just to keep, my night meeting schedules consistent, because the county council meetings are on Tuesdays, so it is helpful to know, basically every Tuesday night is shot for family time. I haven't considered the possibility of having Planning Commission and County Council meetings in the same week. So I'm a little hesitant to comment on that tonight. I know that Monday nights are challenging. The airport board meets on Monday nights, so just in thinking about space requirements, right? The airport board meets Monday nights. They do meet in here, correct? Yeah. So that might prove problematic. But two night meetings back to back could be pretty intense at the staff level, but maybe Tuesday and Thursday could be worth considering. Like I said, I haven't thought about it enough to comment too much on what that kind of impact would be at the staff level, but certainly open to thinking through what that might mean and talking to Kenny about that.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I've grown accustomed to the way it is now, and wouldn't be opposed to it not changing. But at the same time, my Mondays would be okay for me. I'm a little bit flexible. I agree with some of what is with some of the stuff that Zachariah said about the staff and long hours. Just from a staff level, I wonder what it would, it might kind of wreak havoc on some of our 40-hour work weeks that we try to keep. But
So now that we have the YouTube viewing for the county council, as somebody who does travel quite frequently, I'm less concerned about it, though I think there is something to be said about being able to attend in person. However, if we were to consolidate into 1 week, I would recommend not going with Monday, because that means we have 2 weeks. Every time the county council would meet on the Tuesday, it would be 2 weeks until we met again, which is hard for us to respond to what's happening, and that just seems like it would prolong information sharing and process, whereas if it was a Tuesday, Thursday type thing, we would be able to react to what we are hearing from the county council more urgently and adapt that into our recommendations and our thinking. So just not the Monday before would be my recommendation.
My thought was funny is because Zachariah, I remember when he thought it'd be great that it was moved up to 5, because then we might have time to hit the city council meeting. That's never happened. Never happened.
So I think I was the one who originally threw out the idea of moving the county and county council meetings and planning commission meetings closer together. I don't have a strong feeling about Monday versus Thursday. We can also try to do, the Thursday before the Tuesday rather than the Thursday after the Tuesday. Yeah. A separate idea I wanted to throw out there. I think, if we look at, meetings that have had low attendance, usually it's because of people traveling, and it's hard for, it's because we have meetings every 2 weeks throughout the year. It's hard for people to coordinate their travel or find times to do it, except for November and December, where we've sort of said in advance, we're only going to have one meeting that month. I wonder whether it might make sense to designate, in advance some other months where we're just going to have a single meeting. And that way, I'm sure not all of us can do it, but some of us could, if we have to travel, could, hit some of those gaps. So I just wanted to.
I don't know that would work just from a logistical thing. Conceptually, I don't think I'd be able to make my, I don't know that would make a difference in my work travel schedule.
I think it would make a difference in mine. But,
Okay, all right.
I didn't hear the first part of what Cricket said. Tonight is an example where I do need to go to the city council meeting
I
after
said
this.
that you thought it would be a good thing if we start at 5.
Yeah.
So that we would be done in time that you could hit the other meeting.
Yeah.
That has never happened.
Well, it's
Oh,
happening
you
tonight.
mean finishing on time?
Us getting out of here in time that you could
Yeah.
go is what I mean.
Yeah. The other part of that is at the staff level, it is easier to start earlier so that we do have a chance of getting out of here at a reasonable hour. Our recent meetings have been longer than average. I will also note that many communities do have just one planning commission meeting each month rather than 2. I kind of like the idea that if we are going to move in that direction, that we take more of a hybrid approach and designate some months as, having 2 meetings and some as 1. Maybe it could be every other month or something like that. That certainly extends some of the timelines for developers, depending on when they get their applications in, but it gives us more time to, ensure that, all the ducks are in a row and applications are complete and everything. That's something to consider, as far as a conversation with the county council also goes, because I think that there's some relationship to level of service, right? In terms of going from 2 meetings to 1 meeting.
Along the lines of what Zechariah just said, I think if those 5th Tuesday weeks or 5th Tuesday months might be those good months to have double up on meetings.
Yeah.
Because we
Oh, yeah.
there are typically about
Oh, I
4
see, yeah.
4 5th Tuesday months throughout the year, 3 or 4.
So you mean like go to 1 meeting per month except for the months that have
a
4,
5th Tuesday, yeah.
or 5 weeks. Okay.
Just to build on that, if there were to be a meeting per month that was sort of designated for public hearings for consistency, it also would be nice to look ahead on a more quarterly basis for when we're looking at potential policy changes that are still in planning phases. So, for example, the code standards right now, which we're considering in conversation, and we know that there's a hearing coming down the road, and we're about to not meet for a month. And so, if we were to move in that direction, it might be also nice to give ourselves a quarterly option to meet more frequently for things that don't require a public hearing during the planning phase, so that we can have more consistency of conversation. I mean, I realize this is a more flexible way of thinking about this, but
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely followed what you just said, though.
so say, to simplify, 1 meeting per month that's designated for public hearings, but also adopt a quarterly planning to say, for this quarter, we know we have this large policy conversation, so let's add an additional meeting in the next 3 months, and just build that into the cadence so that we can, and then other months, so in the summer, we might not have that happening, or this last summer, we had a lot going on.
Yeah.
And we can also just be more mindful about spacing our time.
I like the idea that Kenny had about, well, at least the concept of having 3 meetings a month on months that have 5 Tuesdays.
I don't think that's what he was.
Yeah, I think he was saying
suggesting.
2 meetings a month on if we move to, if we move towards 1 meeting a month, then the long months would have a second meeting, not a third meeting.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just building on what he said, that,
Oh, I see.
sorry. I don't know about you guys, but by the time we get out of here some nights, everybody's pretty rummy, and I don't think we have good conversation. And I think shorter meetings or having meetings that start earlier in the day would help to alleviate that problem. But if we took your advice, Emily, and said, okay, we're going to have all of our hearings one night, I can see potential train wreck. That's the last people whose projects are at hearing are going to get short shrift just because of the time of night it is and people have been busy and stuff. So I'm a little concerned about that.
Here's a thought when you're, I'm sorry, were
I'm
you
not
still
quite
going?
done.
Okay.
And personally, it would be better for me to have meetings on Mondays, Tuesdays, or Wednesdays than Thursdays. It fits my travel schedule a lot better. So if we were going to change from Tuesday nights to another night, I would suggest that we do it on Wednesday, because Wednesday the same week as the county council meets. Because it sounds like we have a scheduling conflict with this room on Monday nights of those weeks.
Just the first week of each month. The
Okay.
first Monday of each month is the airport board.
Oh, if we're not meeting on the first Monday, then there's not a conflict.
The other
No.
Mondays, there are conflicts. But if you're trying to have meetings the same week as the county council, then the first and third Mondays are the Mondays of
Oh, I
interest.
see.
Okay, thank you.
And I don't know, I mean, there's certainly historical precedent for the airport board meeting here on the first Monday of every month, but I don't know, that has to always be the case. Ultimately, it's up to the council and the council administrator's office to prioritize, the various boards and commissions with limited space, and only so many nights a week. So, I think it's fine to recommend like a couple different alternatives. I don't have we could certainly try. I would want to think a little bit more about what the experience for staff would be like having a county council meeting on a Tuesday and then every next, and then a planning commission meeting on Wednesday, next day. But
I think another thing to keep in mind is the spacing that we have and the time requirements that we have for a lot of our public hearings. Kind of what we have now, I think, it works pretty well to where, we have certain public hearings that at a planning commission level have to be advertised 10 days before in the paper. We know that if it passes, we have at least 10 more days after that first public hearing that we have to advertise in the paper again for the county council meeting. I mean, just some things to think about. That might be thrown off a little bit with having meetings on like back to back in the same week.
So
It's just an idea.
So Kenny, if I understand you correctly, then shifting our meetings to closer to the county council would actually speed things up, because we would be able to schedule that 10-day period in between. So
Okay.
so instead of it taking 3 weeks on average, it would go down to 2 weeks, that phase of it.
Yeah. So do you guys want to just think about it? Tara wants us to tell her what our schedule is by the 20th of December. So we could think about it until next meeting and then decide at that time.
Well, I know I'm not gonna be here, but it scares me with cutting them down to less meetings because we already had problems with quorums. So that means less meetings with
So-
possible, that,
Potentially, it could be like 2 months that there's not a meeting, if there's one meeting where there isn't a quorum. Yeah.
that would highly concern me as
Yeah.
somebody on that side trying to get something passed.
Yeah, I think also Garish's point of if we had fewer meetings and they were longer, that might be tough. I also think a lot of, it kind of depends on what the issues are for the year, I suppose, but a lot of the things that we've been discussing this past year have been ongoing but with deadlines, and so I think it has been helpful to check in more often. You know, for example, the discussion on like the overnight accommodation standards, I think being able to check in on that more often when we're dealing with this deadline is helpful, and if we had fewer meetings and firm deadlines, it might be more difficult to really put enough time into those issues and give public enough opportunities to be involved in the discussions.
Just to throw out an idea, in response to concerns about the time that we get out of here and how long meetings go and when public hearings happen, the county council has adopted, a policy where they, start their meetings at 4 and then they just set a time when public hearings will happen. And I don't know that it's observed consistently, but when it was discussed, and Jaylen, I would invite you to comment on this, but I think there have been some discussions that you just schedule public hearings for 6 o'clock, and regardless of where you are in the agenda at 6 o'clock, you pivot to the public hearings. So that people, because public hearings, the idea is that they're just more
Time-friendly.
controversial or potentially controversial, and you're guaranteeing public comment. So just throwing out an idea, one thought could be, starting at 4 and saying public hearings start at 5.
Yeah, I would be willing to start earlier, but I know for some people that work, that might create a problem. I've worked with Kenny on the agendas to move all the hearings up to the beginning of our agendas. So I don't know that setting a time, I can't see that we would have anything on our agendas. I mean, we don't pay bills, and we don't do a lot of the administrative stuff that takes a lot of time up in council meetings. So I don't know that setting a time to say public hearings will start is actually going to buy us anything.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of planning work that we don't get to because we are exhausted after the public hearings, right? And we have always scheduled the action items and the public hearings on the front end of a meeting. I just don't think you can move them. I mean, you certainly legally can, but I wouldn't advocate for moving public hearings before 5 p.m. because, the public who we want to comment on those items, we want to be able to show up, and it's more likely that they could show up at 5 than at 4.
That's a good point.
So, I also think if we have an agenda where we don't have anything but public hearing items, then we can always schedule the meeting for 5 p.m.
Yeah, that's true.
instead of 4.
So I like Zachariah's idea of, starting at 4 and postponing the public hearings till 5 or 5:30. About quorums, I think one of the advantages of having fewer meetings is I think it maybe makes it more likely that we'll get a quorum. If you imagine the extreme case where we only had like 4 meetings a year, I think we would all try a lot harder to schedule our vacations or whatever to make it. Since we have so many meetings, I think, we all realize it's just impossible to attend every single meeting, and so we're a little more casual about missing them. And then finally, I'm forgetting what I was going to say. Oh, yeah. So one thing we might do is, I think someone threw out the idea of alternating months or something. You have one it's basically 3 meetings every 2 months. if we did go that way and we decided we had more work or we needed to schedule an extra meeting, there would be a natural day on which to schedule it. So we wouldn't have to scramble so much to find another day. So we could sort of ask people to keep those other extra days open just in case, we decide that the meetings are getting too long or we have something special we need to do under a deadline.
And I know I'm not going to be here, but as far as like 4 o'clock and people working, at least at 5 more than likely you would have your quorum. If somebody couldn't be for the discussion item before, it wouldn't be as imperative as being there for the, what you need a quorum for. So that, if I was still doing it, I would think 4 would be awesome, because then you could get out of here earlier. But and then if somebody couldn't be because they had to work, at least they'd be here for the public hearing or what you need the quorum for.
I would love to start at 4, and I think,
4 would work for me.
And ideally, we're all here in person for those discussions, but we have the backup now of YouTube to be able to catch up by video, to hopefully address the audio issues. If we needed to call in from the car just to listen to the first part, for those of us with kids, sometimes it's the juggle. But, as a working mom, 4 does work for me on one.
Well, let's, we've had some good discussions, some good ideas kicked around, so what if we put this on our agenda for our next meeting in December? And hopefully we'll have hashed things out enough tonight that people have a strong preference as to how they'd like to go.
Yeah. It's one final remark, just in kind of summarizing, or maybe not summarizing, but after this discussion, I think that, from the staff level, having one meeting every other month and 2 meetings the other months, let's just say, okay, the even months are 1 meeting per month and the odd months are 2 meetings per month. I don't think that, the only 2 meetings that we have now begun consistently canceling are the one for Thanksgiving and for around Christmas. But if you moved it to the 1st and 3rd weeks, then we wouldn't have to, adjust the calendar in an inconsistent way at all, because let's just say it was the odd months that were 2 meetings per month. That second meeting in November wouldn't conflict with Thanksgiving, so you could still always hold that, and then you'd only have 1 meeting in December, which wouldn't conflict with anything. So, or vice versa, frankly. Because it's that 4th Tuesday that tends to conflict with Thanksgiving or Christmas. So.
And I do think it says on the website too that the 4th or the 2nd meeting in July is canceled because of Pioneer Day.
Probably this year.
I know it was this year because there was a lack of items, and I had just assumed it was canceled, and I think it's still on the. I can.
Well, so maybe then it
anyway.
makes sense to have all the odd, I guess even if it was the 1st and 3rd, it still wouldn't conflict with Pioneer Day, which is in the 4th.
Pioneer Day,
seriously.
holiday for the county?
Yes.
Oh,
State holiday.
Since we're asking staff to consolidate the questions we're sending by Tuesday for applicants,
Yeah.
would staff also just sort of collect this conversation into some bullet points we can review?
Yeah, so I'll include that. The other thing I think that might be helpful, in maybe just responding to that email is enough. But if you guys could present a couple different ideas, or what your idea of how these meeting schedules would look, and I'd be more than glad to share those with the group and bounce those off of you guys prior to our next meeting as well. So, but I think it would be helpful if there was something that everybody could see, just as a suggestion. So,
okay. So, thank you, Kenny. We'll continue this discussion. Okay, next up is proposed code changes of section 9.1, notice and requirements. So So hopefully everybody's had a chance to look at what your chair wrote up as far as potential changes. I didn't talk to staff about this, and I haven't talked to anybody else about it, so I'll just say that the reason that I think that I'm a firm believer in not only transparency, but public involvement. And if people are unaware that things are going on, and occasionally people come in and they go, we didn't know this was even happening. You know, you can't make them read the newspaper. You can't make them read the legal pages, and you can't make them drive all over Spanish Valley looking for signs to know when something that they might be interested in is coming up. So there's some things that I've included in here that seem like they would help to get at least neighbors or people who pass by properties better informed as to what's going on. So I don't know if you want me to go through what I've said here, but the biggest burden, I think, would be the requirement to do mailings. A lot of other communities require applicants to mail notice of what their action item is to neighbors or property owners within a certain distance of their property, and then they can get a list through the recorder's office of who the owners are. It's not that difficult, and they can mail them out. It's cost just regular postage, but then they certify with an affidavit that they sent the mailing out to everyone that's on the list who are within a certain distance of their property. That is a fairly significant change to the way we require public noticing now. And there are other places in the code where, I mean, this just deals with 9.1.8. This would all have to go through the county council to see if they're in agreement for it. And there are other places in the code where there may be some additional references to noticing that I didn't check on that would have to be changed in order to make the code internally consistent. So what are your thoughts, if any?
So when the mailings would go to property owners that border the property in question?
In some cases, it depends on the distance.
You might want to also specify, you know, there are some large parcels, so if, well, it's going to be 250 feet from any property boundary edge, so.
All property boundaries, so like this corner, this corner, this corner, this corner.
Yeah.
They say
Some
250
communities
feet.
that are more dense than Grand County have a requirement of 750 feet or 500 feet or 200 feet. So I don't know what the right distance would be, but I threw out 250 feet just because it seemed like it was maybe less onerous than going 500 feet, but I'm not sure it makes sense other than that.
Well, at least the 250, the neighbors could inform other neighbors and have an idea. I agree, people don't know, and then they're up in arms because they didn't know. Well, it's on the corner. Well, I don't drive by that corner. Okay. And it's a little sign. Well, okay. But I like the idea of it not being put on staff, being put on part of the developer's
Yeah,
part of it, you know?
I like that also.
And I think that that's required in the city.
I don't know, maybe,
There's
but,
something, because I've had to go before for when they've done some kind of
Yeah.
big zone change. When I worked for the title company, I had to go take a ruler and measure around and figure out and get the addresses. So I think the city requires something similar, or they
Well,
used to.
luckily, the recorder's office can do it with their technology. They
Yeah,
can just-
now, yeah.
They can just draw circles.
we can do that in our office for folks as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I do like that the onus is on the applicant. It's not that burdensome. but it is time-consuming for staff, when put in consideration of all the other workflows that we have. I think, 250 or 300 feet would be fine. And then the only other comment I would have is that I don't think that overlays needs to be specified in that table, because all the overlays are treated as rezones in the
Well,
code.
Yes, well.
But it
we've
also
had-
doesn't give me any heartburn, because it's.
Yeah,
you know,
the reason I
it's
put
one
it in
for-
there was there's been discussion when we said, this is like any other rezone, and we've been corrected by staff saying, no, this is not a rezone, this is an overlay. So I wanted to make sure that the table showed that
Yeah.
variances, overlays, and rezonings all are zoning map amendments.
Yeah,
So
that's fine.
maybe, and maybe this is what you intended, if it said overlay eligibility districts, then I think it wouldn't be redundant. I think that's what was missing.
Mm,
We're changing the boundary to eligibility district, that's not technically a rezone.
No, that's not.
So I think in our conversation from months ago, that was the one we wanted to fill in here.
What I was, yeah, and that,
Well,
this,
so, I see what you mean. No, what Garish is referring to is the application of an overlay to a specific parcel.
yes,
And you're referring to
The
just
map.
the boundaries of an
There's a
eligibility
place
district.
on the west side of the highway and some Bynum properties where we were.
Correct.
So that, they did the notification, but technically they didn't have to. And so I think the discussion at that time is when we should change the rules so that if similar situations arise, then they would have to.
But that would, yeah, so,
so maybe what we need to do is add another line here for application types, including what you said about overlay eligibility district or eligibility maps, Kevin, and then add another line for, or maybe there's another place in the code where we could say that the same notice and requirements apply if someone is going to come in with a HDHO or other type of overlay application.
I actually think you could just, where you've added overlays, just put a comma and put overlay boundaries. And then you're covering all of those scenarios.
You sure you don't want to say, I thought eligibility district was what we call those things?
Fine, eligibility districts.
I just want to,
Yeah.
I don't care what we call them, I just
Sure,
want to
yeah.
always call them the
But-
same thing.
But I think we're referring to the same concept of modifying
Right.
the maps associated with the overlay
And
ordinance.
it's from all property lines, because you don't want them just to do it along, if it's a big piece of property, just do along Spanish Valley Drive and not on the
Yeah, They have the
backside.
technology that they can pull up all of those property owners. So, to make it complete, do we need to say that land use applications, or specify the types of land use applications in the table here? For instance, Eric came in tonight with his project, he wanted to get our recommendation from us, he'd been in with a public hearing. He was covered because if he had just gone with, he wanted to get a subdivision without the overlay, is that covered in this table adequately?
Well, no, because it wouldn't require public notice. It's an administrative review.
It's not adding, it's not increasing density, it's just,
No, I mean, if somebody's proposing a subdivision that is in line with their base zoning district, then a public hearing is not required. And thereby,
So these are,
public notices are not required. These are for legislative
Yes.
actions.
so I guess my question is, and thanks for the clarification, are there any other legislative actions that should be included in this application type table?
Not off the top of my head, although we are working towards making conditional use permits, right, administrative. I don't think we're there yet, so, if we get there, then that would come out, but I don't see any other application types that would need to be added that aren't currently there.
Or the overnight accommodations overlay.
That's gonna be an overlay though, just like the high density housing overlay or planned unit development overlay, so that'll be covered. we're not gonna specify in that table the various overlay types, just that
Right.
overlays writ
Not,
large.
yeah, I did not intend to do that. So what about the distance from properties that notice would be mailed?
Yeah, so I thought the 250 seemed a little low. I think a lot that's 250, imagine a square subdivision and they're 250 feet on the side. I think those are like 1.5 acre lots. And so, in that case, you would just have to notify your immediate neighbors, but not a lot that's, the second house down the street. So, I think, probably in areas that are already rather dense, 250 is fine, but in the more sparsely populated parts of the county, I think the impact of something happening, 500 feet away, can still be significant. So I would be inclined with something closer to 500.
I wonder if we were to,
Are you responding to Kevin?
yes,
Okay.
yes. In response to this question of distance and specifically your comment around more dense areas versus less dense areas, I actually, instead of expanding that distance, I might add language to the posting requirements that, to space signs along runs of property lines longer than a certain distance. So for example, right now, if we have very, very large lots and we have one sign per front-facing road, then you also are only mailing to the immediate neighbors. It reduces the likelihood of people being aware. Whereas if you were to increase the signage along those longer runs but maintain the 250, you still have, you account for the less dense areas and still increasing awareness. So, whereas because there are places in the county where things are very dense and an additional 100 feet even could start to majorly increase that onus on the property owner and
I don't think the onus is that great. It's a matter of printing off an affidavit, printing off a notice, and then we could design or the staff could design a simple notice that they could use, and it would fill in the blank thing, this is what I'm applying for, this is who I am, this is where the property is. Make copies of it, send it out. Then the labor involved is licking stamps and writing addresses on envelopes. I don't see it as a big burden, whether it's 200 feet or 500 feet. The
Well-
number of people that you're going to capture might be kind of overkill in some dense areas, but in some areas, I don't think the mailed notice would be adequate with a shorter distance from the property to get everybody notified who might potentially be affected.
So are you saying you think it should be greater than 250?
Well, I think, yeah, I think, though I put 250 down in here, I think maybe if I go back to the original text of 500 feet would be good. Yeah.
So on the front range, what they do is they just put a sign. Every time we need a meeting, if it's about a lot, there's a sign on the development site.
Yeah, we do that here too.
So
Yeah.
why not just do it in the county and call it good?
We do
have
that
it,
already.
do
and
that
people
in the
don't
county.
read them, and that's the problem we're trying to get
That's their
around.
problem,
No, it's not, well,
right?
well,
It's the
it depends on which way you want to
there
look at it.
It's there for all to see. If you're concerned about that property, you're gonna drive by it and look at it and see the notice.
What if you don't drive by it? What if you go a different way? Or you own property?
You don't have a concern about it.
Wow.
It's just,
So
right?
that's what we've been doing, and I guess people found it unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
They really stepped it up on the front range. I know they did, because I was there and saw it, and it just kind of cuts to the chase there. If you got a concern, then you're gonna go by and look at it, and then it's posted always on the public notice website. You have to post your meetings. So if you're an informed citizen, as we all should strive to be, what's the big deal?
Well, I think the big deal is that there are some really good citizens who aren't very well informed.
A lot of older people
And-
don't do computers.
Well,
Some people
they
don't.
got young kids to help them.
Well, maybe they don't.
Well, they
Could you identify yourself, please?
Exactly.
I understand, but for the record, excuse me? I'm sorry?
My name is Libby.
Okay, Libby.
I'm a homeowner in the county.
Okay, great. Thank you, Libby.
I would like to respond to her comment that if you're doing something on Spanish Valley Drive, and I live in,
Center Street, Moab.
no, I live on East Bench Road, I'm not gonna drive by that, and that's my backyard. So I like that idea. You drive on Spanish Trail, you drive clear out over across from your backyard? Yeah, but not clear
Well-
out, but anyway.
Yeah, I do, and East Bench is right above me. and
I know where it is. It's okay.
Yeah, I drive there, I drive all over the county.
And then if you live in All-American Acres, you might take Beaman Road. You're not gonna go that way, so.
Right, but what's the
my
concern about the
fighting ground.
development that's happening there? Just that your view shed would be interrupted as you drive? I mean, if you have a development interest in that property, then you're gonna be driving by it.
I would recommend going with 500 feet. I feel comfortable with that. So, I also have a comment about the signage, but what is are you wanting like a straw poll on this? To inform staff, how did you want to move forward?
Yeah, I would say, let's give staff a sense of how to draft the language so that we can have a hearing about it. So if you have, you're thinking that for properties that are more than 250 feet, that have boundaries that are more than 250 feet that front the road, that the requirement be to post a sign every 250 feet.
I think that's fair. That's actually not the
I'm okay with
comment I was
that.
going to make, but I actually would make that as well. So long runs, any frontage property
to
line beyond 200 feet should have a sign spaced at least
Yeah,
one
but
per 250.
long runs doesn't cut it in the code. So what
Yes.
is the distance?
I think 250 is perfect. I think it cuts the boundaries. Great. So I would recommend adding that. So just to clarify, I think 500 feet for mailing, I agree with that. If there is a front-facing property line that is greater than 250 feet, that a sign should be spaced at least one per 250 feet on that frontage. Related to posting, if you don't mind me moving on to additional comment.
Go ahead.
So the applicant shall post and maintain, which I agree with, the sign, posted in a prominent and visible place. I'd like to add language that the sign be unobstructed, and I also would like to recommend a letter size on the sign of 2 inches per letter.
Well,
for
the
visibility.
signs that they post are provided by the county.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
if you think they're inadequate in readability,
I know we've heard citizen comments, first related to obstruction, so that's, I think, a distinct issue, free from any kind of shrubbery or anything. That's something that we've had a couple comments on. I feel less strongly about the letter height, but I think I've seen code reflected in other communities of 2 inches per letter, and I think just raising the size, but I'm less,
well, I think some of the lettering on the signs that the county provides are 2 inches or greater in size.
Mhm.
It gets your attention, but then the details might not.
They're the same sizes as political signs. That's what
Mm-hmm.
it's about. And I would say we don't need a code amendment if you want the county to provide larger signs. If we want applicants to do that, then, maybe a code amendment is warranted, but,
I'm not trying to put that burden on the applicant. I do think if we're going to add language to post and maintain a sign, that adding language that the sign be unobstructed from the road. But
I just have a question about, you said that they should maintain it. What do you mean by maintain it? What if they post it and somebody tears it down?
I'll give an example.
Is that
When
responsibility?
when the property that used to be Arroyo Crossing, and I don't know what it's going to be called now, was posted, there was a sign posted. It was the size of one of the election signs, and it was placed in a sandy spot with lots of wind, and it was toppled over. And so I don't know, And if we're going to require signs, we might as well make the signage effective. And to make it effective, they need to make sure that it is up and visible constantly.
But I think, I agree, but I think to say maintained, I don't know that I'd choose that word.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know that, because what if you post it and somebody comes along behind you and tears it down?
Well, then you need to get another sign.
But how do you know that? If you're a developer and you come down on the weekend and you go back for meetings, how are you going to know that? So where's your liability? I mean, I'm just trying to think ahead for, if I post it because I'm changing something and somebody tears it down, well, you didn't maintain it. Well, I didn't, so I'm leery.
I
I'm
think
leery of
staff would
that.
give you, you'd say, I need another sign because somebody tore my
Yeah, but how
sign
would, what I'm saying is, how would you know if you don't live on that property? How would you know? That's what I'm saying.
Well,
So,
Well, so we ask people to send us photos. It's all just about building a record for the, potential circumstance where somebody challenges on the grounds of due process. So, yeah, I mean, in all of these circumstances, we do what we can to try to build a record of public noticing, and certainly the noticing in the paper and the state website, satisfy the most fundamental requirements. I don't have any problem putting in there, the post and maintain. It says in a prominent and visible place, so I don't think we need to add the word unobstructed. Prominent and visible pretty much takes care of that. So, we can always print signs, that are bigger. It's cost effective for us to print them on behalf of the applicants on these political signs, because you can get a lot for pretty cheap, but we can also look at bigger signs. When there is a long frontage, we do ask applicants to post multiple signs within that road frontage. I think, we're pretty cognizant of the need to make sure that the notice, that the public has ample opportunity, and I think that, aside from these posting requirements, the mailing and placing that burden on the applicant will add a lot of strength to the noticing.
So what I would say is, I like Emily's idea of, on properties that are more than 250 feet on a side, that they be posted every 250 feet, or every 250 feet has a
Sure.
sign in it.
We can add some language about that.
So if we can do that.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I just wanted to add about the 500 feet. I'm certainly, if that seems like in certain parts of the county, that's like just too many addresses or doesn't make sense, I would be, open to revisiting it later, but I would be inclined to set it at 500 feet now and then adjust later if we have second thoughts.
Yeah, I'm thinking of dense developments like Hecla is probably one of the densest developments that we've got. 250 feet or 500 feet there is not going to be substantially different than the number of parcels that are picked up within 250 feet. So I would say let's go with the 500 feet, and if it seems like there's too much of a burden, we could relook at redefining zones where there would be a different distance requirement. Okay, any more discussion? We can see this maybe at our next meeting as a hearing, or?
We can bring this back to you as a public hearing item. I don't think it's so complex that
No.
even if you were to make additional changes, they couldn't happen in the public hearing, so.
Yeah.
Because of the noticing requirements, it'll be in December.
Thanks. And thank you, Garish, for looking at that.
You're welcome. Okay. So overnight accommodation standards. Are we going to talk about nodes tonight at all? Okay, then I'll hold off on what I was going to say. Then take it, Zachariah.
Yeah, so, this is a discussion item. It's obviously a continuation of the discussion we've been having, for the last several months. At the last county council meeting, I presented as a discussion item the potential for creating a new standard related to maximum sizes and densities. And the feedback from the county council is included in the updated table for you. In a nutshell, what the county council recommended is that the county establish a maximum building size of of 15,000 square feet and 35 bedrooms, and a maximum project size of 50,000 square feet and 60 bedrooms. And that would apply to both hotels and motels and like condo developments, so residential developments used as overnight accommodations. And for campgrounds, that there would be a limit of 35 spaces. So that is included in the table. So basically what I wanted to do today was just as quickly as possible run through, the remaining categories that I think, may need a little bit of additional attention.
Well, I think
And
those
that
items
would
need
be
some attention.
transportation and mixed use, just to make sure that we are all on the same page as far as where we're going to go for the public hearings, where we're going to start out at. And then I want to spend, as much time as needed talking about the eligibility boundaries. So basically noticing the public where applications would be accepted for application of the overnight accommodations overlay.
Quick question for staff. You said you have to go to the city council meeting. What time do you have to leave by?
It starts at 7.
I just wanted to know what time.
But the agenda item is not until later.
Thank you.
We're not in.
So, Jalen, I've got a question. Does the count, you attended the meeting, so we were leaning towards having a size limit for developments, and it looks, based on what we have in front of us now, the size limit would apply to individual structures within a development, but there could be multiple structures, kind of like, is it the Wyndham, or what is that monstrosity, what is that large development that's going on north of town with
That's the Worldmark window.
World, yeah.
Wyndham
Is it, is the sense of the county council that they would like to see more developments like that? With multiple buildings?
That's not a good example. That's 270,000 square feet.
Well, no, it's a matter of scale, Zachariah. It's a matter of scale. It's like, I don't see the benefit of having a restriction on the size if you're going to allow multiple buildings, even though each building would be, I'm just trying to understand what the thought process was of
There is a
doing that.
restriction on the size, 60,000 square feet.
Or 35 rooms.
So there's a maximum building size and then a maximum project size,
Yes, I
indicating
understand.
that you can have up to 4 buildings
Yes.
in a given project.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering what the
At
benefit.
that maximum building size, or 6 buildings at 10,000 square feet, or...
I can do the math. Thank you, Zachariah. I'm just curious as to why the council would recommend that's the way we go with multiple buildings, even though the buildings would be limited in size.
Well, personally, I would much rather see a scattering of small buildings rather than a big monstrosity, so that's at least part of my thinking. I also did mention, I don't know how this all, I'm still not clear on how it all ties into acreage, so if you have 10 acres, how many projects can you do? You certainly want to limit it to acre application.
Right now, it doesn't matter what acreage you have. So if you had a 4-acre parcel or a 10-acre parcel, you would still be limited to 15,000 square feet per building or 60,000 per project, right? So presumably, a developer could subdivide their property into, 10 one-acre parcels and then present 10 projects, but you don't have to apply the overlay to all 10 parcels that might be created by a subdivision, right? So because the council has to apply the overnight accommodations overlay in every instance before these administrative standards even become relevant, then, if a developer tried to take that approach, the council could say, well, you subdivided your property, we'll apply the overlay to, 2 acres or 2 parcels if they were 1-acre parcels, but we're not going to apply it to the other 8. Something like that,
Actually, so if suppose someone applies for this overlay, and then later they want to subdivide,
There's the recorded master plan that governs the development.
I have a question related to the assured housing.
Did we finish this
This,
discussion?
this is part of this discussion.
okay.
And this came up at the Joint County Council Planning Commission workshop. And I just want to know if the lack of this is an indication of lack of support, or if it just is not considered. And that is the question of any kind of offset for employee housing as a part of the overall project size. So this implies to me that this is all lodging-oriented development. But if there were rooms that were set aside specifically for employees as part of the assured housing, would that be included in this overall project side? Would that offset? Is there any conversation happening at the council level right now around that, or should we just move on from that approach?
Uh,
I don't think that's off the table, I
Okay.
just don't think we've gotten that far
Okay.
yet, we're trying to answer the basics.
Okay.
In my view, this is what I'm.
Yeah, I mean, it was suggested that there could be some incentivization of, non-lodging uses by allowing larger lodging projects, if those other uses were included. I would suggest that, any square footage associated with non-lodging uses, well, I mean, maybe we need to talk about that, but let's say square footage associated with on-site housing units to comply with the assured housing requirement. I would suggest that those don't get counted towards the 15,000 square feet.
So the reason I bring that up, one, is to make sure its lack of inclusion wasn't a lack of support overall. I don't know that it is or
Hard to
isn't,
say.
but-
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've worked through that whole conversation.
I know that we are starting to come up on the end of this planning period and moving towards a hearing. So if it would be possible to calculate that for a maximum project size of 50,000 square feet, what would be the assured housing requirement as part of that under current code, assuming they didn't offset it by cost? I don't know if that's something you could quickly I can't pull it off the top of my head.
So, I'm still baffled by why the council would be thinking that they want 50,000 square foot overnight accommodation developments. I don't understand, I just don't understand where y'all are coming from, but whether they are individual buildings or scattered buildings, one building, or I don't understand where, what's driving it. So,
I think we're trying to walk a fine line between, encouraging high-quality, well-designed overnight accommodations, yet making those standards such that what we do end up with, what people are willing to build, are limited by the very nature of there being
So you're,
How I
you're,
feel personally, but I can't.
well, what I heard you say was you want to encourage high-quality developments, and some people might not want to develop at all if they're limited to 15,000 square feet.
Yes, it might be too costly.
So I think we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I don't think it makes sense to revisit things that have already been discussed. I'd rather discuss some of the new things that we haven't discussed in the past.
Yes, sir.
Kind of along the lines of what was just said, when you look at, I mean, campgrounds really haven't been discussed in any sort of depth, in this whole process. But when you limit a campground to 35 sites, and the amount of space a campground actually takes up of multi-acres, you're creating a scenario where only the rich are going to be able to do it. Because you can't build a 35-site campground on a 3-acre parcel at today's rates of cost of land and expect to break even. I mean, I have 40 sites on 5 acres, and if I were to try to build my campground, I couldn't do it. It's just by making that restriction on campgrounds, which is kind of what I'm gathering a little bit on the hotels, that you're making them so restrictive and expensive to build that you're going to get high quality, high end, very finite developments coming in because that's the only people that can afford it. And that's my comment on the campground side of these things. Like going through this, if these are all the standards that campgrounds are going to be required, nobody's going to build campgrounds. And just because it is super expensive. You know, I'm one of the last locally owned campgrounds in this town. And sure, people want to buy me out, but I don't want to. I want to stay. But I also want to expand. And these restrictions are basically eliminating that possibility.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we really haven't spent that much time talking about campgrounds, but that's a good point.
So should we talk about eligibility district boundaries, or does it make sense to talk about something else first?
Just real quickly to answer your question, the assured housing requirement for a 60,000 square foot hotel or motel, the maximum number of units that somebody would build to comply with that would be at the shallowest subsidy level, so for low income households, and they would be required to offset their impact by building 10.87 housing units. So let's say for a 50,000, I didn't do the, ratio conversion, but let's just say it's 10. It's going to be less than that probably, but the requirement is that those units be an average of 1,000 square feet, so that would add 10,000 square feet.
And you've referenced 60,000 a few times, but it says 50,000 in the packet. I just want to make sure I know typo.
No.
No, I
Okay,
just.
yeah, I understand what you're asking.
I-
Okay, so it's 50,000 square feet is the project maximum.
size, cool.
60 rooms.
Right,
Okay.
thank you.
In the assured housing ordinance, the table that you use basically to determine your assured housing requirement uses 60,000 square feet as the reference point. So a 50,000 square foot project, let's just say your requirement is 10 units. That's 10,000 square feet.
Thank
So, that would bump up a maximum project size to 60,000 square feet.
If
which
it
is-
wasn't included in, if it was an option. Sorry, I follow you. I think,
Yeah,
yes, thank you.
okay. Of structure.
Structure, gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we can, I agree with Kevin. I think that the conversation about maximum building and project size is pretty hashed out at this point, although you will have more opportunities in the public hearing. I just think that the council has expressed its straw poll, or its will via straw poll, at least to this stage. So I would say if it's possible, just to go through that table. The red text is what I'm going to be focusing on specifically for mixed use and transportation. Everything else is pretty much worked out at this stage. We haven't come up with language associated with curb appeal, but we can come back to that if we even need to in a little bit. So mixed use, we had encouraged the county to eliminate mixed-use requirements in the rural districts, and we still hadn't come up with anything that would be, that staff at least feels comfortable with and we think would be really effective and successful in the urbanizing district. So what you see in the table is that Kevin had suggested that if we want to include a mixed-use requirement, that the OA development be required to reserve some percentage of the ground stories or the public road fronting land for non-lodging uses that provide a service to the community and are open to the public. I think I'm still I think that's fine. I think we could come up with a small percentage, 10 or 20% or something like that. I would probably say ground stories rather than the space between the building and the public fronting road, although maybe we say it's an either or. I don't know if that's what your intent was, but if it was an either or situation, I think that would be fine. I'm also fine actually eliminating it altogether. I think that the fact that lodging uses are no longer principal uses in the base zoning districts, and you've created all of these new standards that the market, the land economics are going to be fundamentally shifted such that, if a non-lodging use is actually viable, it will have a chance of succeeding at this point. So that would be the conversation we have on mixed use. And then for transportation, maybe there's not that much conversation that needs to happen beyond what's shown in there, but I didn't get a chance to really confirm with you all that you were comfortable with what's shown in that box. So whatever you want to tackle first, those are the two that that stand out, and then height as well. So three categories.
Well, I'll tackle or comment on height first. I think it's good to have the ridgeline standards being referenced.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we, the county, should look at doing some analysis in the future to better define what we're trying to protect, because I don't think the ridgeline standards come close to protecting anything.
Right. I'm not, and I don't think we were prepared to offer anything more definitive, before this deadline.
Yeah, no, I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, but I
We got
appreciate
work to
the
do.
acknowledgement that, something more refined would be helpful.
I have a question. What's the tallest building in Moab?
Probably 42 feet.
No, I mean, what's the building?
Maybe the hoodoo?
If you're just talking structure, it's probably out at the Trempealeau Potash plant,
Yeah, but I'm talking, more than this side.
35 feet.
The hoodoo.
I would say, maybe the Robbers Roost building, county courthouse is up there. Yeah.
So I
The
had a
new
remark
cell
about
phone tower out by the arena?
I had a remark about the transportation topic. So one of the things we're requiring is a shuttle stop, and I guess there was some earlier discussion about trying to get them to actually run a shuttle, and I agree it kind of doesn't make sense to only impose that on new hotels. That's something that should probably be done collectively. But then in thinking about a shuttle stop that's going to go from hotel to hotel, it would probably be more efficient if it could just kind of pull off of 191 and not have to drive deep into the lot. And so maybe this could be clear, we could put the language here that if you're building a new hotel, you need to make a place where people can quickly be dropped off or picked up without, going around a bunch of circles and slowing everything down.
I I see your intent. We can try to work on some language for that. I think in the context of developing a public transit system, we'll probably want to consolidate stops, such that it's not necessarily every hotel. It's, 2 or 3 developments in a vicinity are kind of funneling their people to one transit stop that serves them all, right? That's the notion of a transit-oriented development. But you mean like internal to a development?
I was just throwing out the idea, and maybe it doesn't make sense, but that, if you're in a hurry and don't want to be slowed down by making too many stops between your hotel and Arches or wherever it's going, and if it could just pull off of a bus lane, off of 190, off of Main Street, as opposed to driving up to the lobby and going around the circle.
So what if we added space to accommodate a transit or shuttle stop is close to the public
Street.
fronting road?
Yeah, sure.
Well, I don't think the way it's written now would preclude that, and it would make sense to make the shuttles pickups and drop-offs as efficient as possible. So,
But I thought pretty much, I think our original version of this just said they should have a shuttle stop, and then someone pointed out that every hotel, they've got a front door and a lobby, and that's where a shuttle can stop, so that's, it's very little imposition, but it's not really gaining us that much. And so, I admit, I haven't thought this out thoroughly, but I think better shuttle stops are ones that, the bus can stop and let people off and get going more quickly. And so if they incorporated that into their design.
Yeah, although I think that this standard is it's referencing more and maybe we just don't even put in the word transit, but typically a public transit system is not going to go into a private property anyways. And so, when I'm thinking about these spaces in terms of the standard, I'm thinking privately owned shuttle system by the hotel. And I think in both cases, actually facilitating use of that system rather than people taking their private vehicles, you want to make it actually most convenient for the users, not for the driver of the shuttle system.
I'll say one more thing and then I'll drop it. But I guess I'm thinking of actual shuttle systems in resort communities that I've used, and also the bus that used to go from Moab to Salt Lake. And all of those did go deep into private property to stop. And as a passenger on those shuttles, I found it kind of irritating, just the sort of inefficiency and slowness of it. And I probably would have preferred if they could, if they're going to hit 3 hotels before leaving town, if they could have done it more quickly. So that's all.
the system that Springdale has is really great. It just goes along Main Street, and there are designated stops. So I think that's kind of what and they're not too frequent, so that Kevin wouldn't get too impatient waiting to get into the line of people trying to walk into Zion National Park. But Springdale does have a really great shuttle system in conjunction with the park.
Quick. Well, I'll make the comment I was going to make. We can move on from that. As one of the more vocal proponents of mixed use, honestly, I think I would make the recommendation. We just scrap the red text under mixed use altogether. We've been circling, trying to find some language that works. I think we hear from staff that there isn't a consensus of what that even means for our community. I hope it's something we can revisit in the future as we see how development patterns change as a result of the adopted ordinance and the code standards. But my recommendation is we don't try and catch that with the time we have. It shouldn't be a high priority at the moment.
Do you want to take a straw poll on that? And it sounds like we don't need to discuss transportation anymore. We can work on some of that language a little bit and see if we can come up with something to Kevin's interest. But for today's purposes, I think I'm hearing that Yeah, or maybe the lack of other comments. I guess I'm interpreting that as not needing any more discussion on transportation. Is that correct?
I am in agreement with Kevin.
Okay.
So,
So we have a couple people that are interested in seeing, some additional work on, like, the configuration of the shuttle stop or the transit stop requirement. So we can work on that. Anything else on transportation before we move to mixed use? And then I would suggest we take a straw
I would like
poll.
to separate shuttle stops from a transit stop.
Okay, so I think transit, that's not going to be something that we put into these standards. That's going to be, a truly public endeavor. So one option would be to remove the word transit, and just have space to accommodate a shuttle stop.
I'm in favor of that. I think any additional language around shuttle stops, if we indeed want to move towards public transit, the shuttle stops could result in empty shuttle stops along the road that aren't used. I think, to your point of it's not enough, I think putting language in our code specific to any kind of public transportation is a huge step forward, quite frankly. And I would not like to see us get more specific on shuttle stop, front of the hotel. Let's make transit a
Leave it
separate.
as is, or?
That would be that's what
Okay.
I would vote towards, recommend.
So why don't we take a straw poll on that? There are two people who want to, to explore language, but if the other four of you want to see it as is, I'm not going to spend a bunch of staff time working on that.
Just to clarify, as is, but I would remove transit. So your recommendation is what I would recommend to the county council.
So can I ask for a straw poll on keeping number one as is, keeping number one as written without the word transit?
I'm in favor of
I'm sorry, I'm kind of torn. I don't know.
Meaning you want to keep transit?
No, not meaning I want to keep transit, but of just leaving it as that or doing further.
that. We'll just let it.
Okay, so
Okay,
we'll,
so I'm
we'll
sorry.
see if we can develop some
I'll-
language. Let's move on from
Yeah.
that. Let's,
But I
we'll
do
work
wanna
on
say-
some language and bring it at the next meeting.
I just want to clarify that I think developing that language is a fairly low priority.
Okay.
If it doesn't happen, I'm not going to complain
Okay.
or anything.
Cool. Anything else in transportation? Okay, so let's move to mixed use. Did you want to make a comment?
Well, I mean, it's just, the comment I have is number two about the bike storage and stuff. They're in campgrounds, it's completely irrelevant. I have bike storage and it gets 0% usage. So, I guess I'm really here just to maybe ask the question, are campgrounds gonna count any kind of this specific development standard, or are they just gonna be considered a hotel and this is what you're gonna have to build? Because frankly, most of what I see here is just irrelevant to a campground. Campground is basically spots for people to park their own things. And,
So,
I mean, that's
yeah, so we have campground standards already, right?
on the conditional use stuff.
Yeah, those will get transferred into just they're not going to be conditional uses, but those site-specific standards, I think, will remain in place.
Right, and that's what I'm questioning though, is these regulations going to be added on top of that? Because, I mean, I have issues like the solar power, I mean, you can't run a campground with solar power. It's impossible, because you can't control the development standards of people's RVs and things like that. The bike storage is irrelevant, so there's a lot of things that I see in here that are completely irrelevant to campground development standards. And I just don't see any discussion about how campgrounds being lumped into this discussion makes any sense.
So I would be in favor of us, after we're done with this, going through and seeing, which
Yeah.
of these, if any, might be relevant to campgrounds. And
Is it- I mean,
I agree with you that, a campground is different from a hotel. And I think when we've been doing these rules, we've had hotels in mind. And so we should not.
I agree as well. I think that, a lot of these do still pertain to RV campgrounds. And, the density scale question has received the most attention in terms of differentiating between campgrounds and hotels. But but I think that Kevin's recommendation is probably the best, and I would recommend to you that, the most efficient way to get your comments to the planning commission and to council and to staff is to just submit an overarching document saying, this applies, this doesn't, I think this could be tweaked, this doesn't, because it's going to take a long time to go back through each one of these and talk about the individual.
That would be really helpful if we had your ideas on paper.
Right. I'm just trying to get a feel, because, I haven't purchased the property yet, but I just don't know how feasible it's going to be, because I can buy a piece of property and not make any headway here. And so, I've really been stuck in a rut since
Yeah.
February. And so, I don't really want to make recommendations to make it easier to build a campground if those aren't going to be usable for my kids. So, I just didn't know if this is what's going to be passed, and then maybe things are adjusted later down the line. I'm just trying to understand.
So I think this is a clear point in time where, given your interest, I think you should be submitting comments to the effect of applicability to campgrounds and what the implications would be. I mean, you could have been doing that for the last 4 months as well. Now I think you're hearing very clearly
Why not?
to do that going forward.
Right. I mean, I've been involved since February.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. We've mostly been considering design standards for hotels. That would also apply to condominium units and other types of overnight accommodations other than campgrounds. So I think you're absolutely right that we probably haven't paid it the attention that we should have, but we didn't have anybody coming to our meetings saying, well, what about us? So.
Well, and admittedly, from the staff level, we already have standards in place for campgrounds, whereas we don't have any standards in place for these other lodging uses.
Which is why I was opposed to that being involved in this.
We know that we're going to be addressing redevelopment standards, and that's not something we're looking at as part of this process. I think that signals an intent to continue the work once this is done. At this point, hotels seem to be the largest impact that we feel as a community, and so these code standards, which we don't currently have something to offset that impact, is the priority. And I think that it's okay to declare a priority to get this done efficiently, given the deadline we have, but also to know that there is an intent signal to continue to iterate and revisit this, so.
So then my final question would be, why are you
I think, well, my answer to that is that when there was public outreach done to try to get a sense of what the community wanted, people were kind of sick of all the development. Campgrounds were lumped in with condominium units that were overnight accommodations. They were lumped in with B&Bs that were overnight accommodations. They were lumped in with hotels. So rightly or wrongly, that's how it all happened. There wasn't a differentiation made.
Well, and I would say, the one standard that we don't currently have on a campground is a maximum size. So, by the Planning Commission and the County Council stating that they don't want campgrounds larger than 35 spaces, that's meaningful. And that is part of this conversation. And, all the other design standards that you're referencing, may be significantly less applicable to a campground, but that's a big one, right?
I mean, that's what I'm saying. I don't understand where the 35 comes from. I understand small developments, but in this town, the price of land, things like that, 35 is impossible.
One of the intentions of trying to restrict the amount of overnight accommodation development is to try to get land prices to stabilize, because the highest and best use is for hotels.
Well, and what you're going to do tonight is designate, certain areas that things are able to be developed in is going to significantly change prices. It's going to make some properties worth more, some properties worth less. But is that going to help certain developments like mine?
So can
Well,
we,
if
can we
there's an
move on
area
to
where
height?
hotels and motels are not allowed and residential developments are not allowed, but campgrounds are, then, this notion that, a campground couldn't compete with any other use with respect to the cost of land, it's a fundamentally different situation, right?
If that does happen.
Yeah.
With respect, it depends on the level of service of the campground too. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Because you can have a campground, and I saw one the other day hiking. There's a car parked, because somebody needs to sleep without the cop harassing them. That's a campground. You're talking RVs idling, that's a campground. You're talking, campgrounds with little haciendas on them, that's a campground. The level of service of a campground is vast.
So I have a question about height. Are we done with the other things? Can we
Mixed
move on
use,
to that?
so straw poll vote on eliminating the mixed use requirement altogether.
So the alternatives are eliminating it altogether or reserving some
Or-
space near the
Yeah,
road frontage.
basically filling in the blank in that red text.
And I'd say for me, it depends a lot on the size of the eligibility districts. If they're relatively small, then I don't really care what the mixed use requirement is because we'll be getting mixed uses just by, and if the eligibility districts are large, then I would want to see something. So it's hard for me to vote on this before we know about that.
No, I think that's a very good point. I'm leaning more towards removing mixed use, personally.
I don't think staff has clear direction on how to move forward other than to set this aside and do nothing right
Okay,
now.
let's have a
So-
straw vote. All who,
Well, I propose that we just, after we have the discussion about eligibility districts, we revisit it in this meeting.
that's a good
Okay.
idea.
So set this aside for now and revisit it, okay?
Okay.
So height was the last category that I think needed some additional discussion tonight.
So I was curious, in the comments column, you have, perhaps a viewing angle limitation from the road would be, this is the first time I've seen that. Is that something that's been tried elsewhere, or do we have a particular angle in mind, or? 'Cause it seems like potentially that gets at what we care about with the height. So I was just curious to know more.
You want to speak to that?
I just was also thinking that that would potentially get to what you're wanting to do with the height, because it would go up from the road, and so at road level, then, you have the smaller buildings right in front of you, so you don't get, some, like, a kind of tunnel effect. And then further back, they could potentially be a bit higher up to whatever your maximum height is, because it wouldn't have as much of an impact on the rim view, so just
Yeah,
geometrically it made sense.
I like that concept, but I think we can probably, if we do a view shed analysis, we can probably fine tune that, because there's some properties that are below grade of the viewpoint, and so the angle may change depending on the location of the viewpoint to the subject property. But yeah, I like the idea of, at a first look at it, come up with an angle, and I don't know if that's 20%, 40%, so we need to fill that in, but some angle would help to get the taller part of buildings further from the viewpoint.
So I think your concern about buildings that are actually lower, I mean, I don't think this would be the only height restriction. We would have some like absolute maximum height.
Oh,
And
yeah,
then some
no.
minimum guaranteed, like you can
No,
always
no,
build a
I'm saying-
two-story building no matter where.
A
and-
28-foot building that's on a little rise next to the viewpoint has a lot more impact than if it were in a depression. Same building height.
So I guess I would be interested in pursuing that and trying to come up with actual numbers if that's possible.
I think it'd be pretty easy to do qualitatively, just go out with a chronometer and look at obstructed views and those angles and see what kind of, where the sweet spot might be.
Another, potential approach to this is just requiring a view shed analysis as part of an application.
Requiring the analysis, but then how would that lead to
Well, because it
restrictions?
could dictate whether the county approves or doesn't approve
I see.
I don't think
an
the analysis,
overlay.
I don't think the analysis by itself would be enough. We'd want to have some
Right,
standards.
in addition to that, of
Yeah.
course, but, you could keep the administrative standard pretty simple, and the much more nuanced and case-specific stuff, at the, legislative application of the overlay stage, just given how different every site is going to be. So you could say something like, the developments shall have a maximum of of 2 stories or 30 feet unless a view shed analysis shows that, the, the rim behind it would not be obstructed or something like that.
I was thinking the other way, that there'd be a limitation of 1 story for things that would have an impact, but if they were constructing further from that viewpoint, then maybe they could get a higher height.
I don't think we're going to get to 1 story.
Well, you might, I'm trying to think of a way to incentivize them having less visual
Yeah.
impact. And
We can work on the viewing angle as a start.
This seems like one that is very complex for where we currently are in the process. I would, if it's going to be an issue, and if it also is an issue at the county council level, I'd recommend stricter standards and then to revisit it. But your recommendation of 2 stories unless you can prove feels very comfortable. I'm very comfortable with making a recommendation along those lines in the short term.
Yeah. The other thing is to just not even, I would prefer that we adopt standards that we like out of the gate the first time rather than just adopting something to get it in there and then going back and changing it. So, another approach is to say, well, we're just not there yet, and so we're not even going to include the view shed standard, and we'll visit that, later. That's another approach.
my preference would be your recommendation of, or your suggestion that maybe we require a view shed analysis on every project, and then see what the impacts are, and then, I don't know, without having standards in place, though, that we can actually, the county could actually say, no, I'm sorry, you can't build that there, even though the height meets the direction within the underlying zone district. So, I can see there's some work that would be needed.
Out of curiosity, why are we making the recommendation at this moment to adopt this to both districts? It seems like the ridgeline standard in the urbanized area would make sense. It's the more rural developments that we've seen come before us that have had more, I'm not just saying view shed issues aren't an issue with all of these properties, but it is the developments that have come before us further north, out in the more rural areas that have been more contentious. It seems like adopting a standard, a ridgeline standard inside of the urbanized area, wherever that ends up being, would account for most of the projects we've seen come before the body in the last 2 years at least.
I don't think, not the way our ridgeline standard is written. I think it wouldn't have blocked, the hotel that everyone's complaining about, I think is, very far within our ridgeline standards, because our ridgeline standards are written in terms of the highest point on the property. And so if you have something in 191 and your property line goes halfway up the slope, as long as you're not building up there on the slope, you're good.
Maintain views up to the lower bench of the Moab Rim from
But
US 191.
that's not our current ridgeline.
I'm saying I think that one I would be comfortable with adopting in the urbanized areas, and then considering more strict recommendation. This just seems like something that is very, very complex, and really, well, the ones it has affected have been a hot topic, it has only affected a small subset of projects that have come before us, and just where we are in the process.
I guess I misunderstood what you were saying, stricter in the urban areas or less
Like
strict in the urban?
Just the questions around, like, view shed analysis and the hinterland points and all that, that seems like it's much more, based off the projects that we have seen in the last 2 years, it seems like that is much more of an issue for potential developments in the more rural parts of the county. And I'm thinking specifically north of the city boundaries is where that has been an issue. I understand the concern of not addressing it at this time, that, that one project may come up and it may get adopted and we might lose an opportunity, but it just seems like a very small number of these projects are very, very contentious in this area. There's still legislative decisions whether, or not we give specific code standards, and it gives us the time to address this in a more meaningful way, because it just feels like we're shooting darts at a board a little bit.
I guess.
Like, quite frankly, I wouldn't feel comfortable adopting stricter standards. I don't know what a standard use and analysis consists of, and it's not something I have spent a lot of time on, and I just don't want to adopt or recommend adopting a standard without analysis. It just seems like it's a pretty big burden on potential developers for something that is.
So I guess I would say that the viewshed issues that have come up they've come up for both the more rural areas like around 313 and in town, but they're different issues. I think in town what people are complaining about are buildings close to the highway blocking their view, kind of hulking over them. And I think in the more rural areas it's sort of, messing up a pretty view or something like that. And those are different things that, need to be covered by different standards. So
I think that's what I'm
I agree
saying.
with you that they are not the same, but I wouldn't say that one's more urgent than the other.
Well, sounds like we're not gonna find resolution tonight.
We could take a
will.
straw poll though on direction, because I think that would be informative.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, whatever you think is gonna give us direction at this stage.
Well, the total height
helpful.
limitation needs defined, to be defined. View shed standard would supersede height limitations.
You need to speak to your microphone.
Sorry. I don't know that necessarily gets at the issue, because it doesn't have enough meat on the bone yet. But in general, I agree with the statement, that comment is a good comment. I like the idea of, at least preliminarily, recommending that a viewshed analysis be done on every project. So at least the council can make an informed decision as to what impact that's going to have on the viewshed. So I don't know if there's agreement there or not, but, and it would maybe be helpful if we had some examples of angles and distances from a viewpoint so we have a picture in our mind as to what we're actually talking about.
If you're recommending the viewshed analysis, just to confirm, that would happen at the adoption of the approval of the master plan phase. I'm sorry I don't have this information, but what is the average cost of a viewshed analysis for a property, say, at 313 and 191? Is it substantially different from one that would be in town?
The cost of conducting the analysis?
Yeah, I have no idea what kind of burden that is.
No, I mean, it's basically you're gonna be planting an architectural rendering, photography, looking at prominent points that would either be obstructed or still visible. I mean, it is, it's a pretty standard feature in most architectural programs. In this day and age, I don't think of it becomes that much of a burden. So.
In that case, I would support requiring viewshed analysis as part of applications.
I'd be curious to see a straw poll on ridgeline standards that's written in the table being adopted for urbanized areas, that hinterland, open space, and viewshed standards being adopted for rural areas, and then requiring the viewshed analysis for all potential developments. And finally, the OA development shall have a maximum height of 2 stories or 30 feet unless the viewshed analysis proves no substantial blocking of prominent geological features, something to that effect. The intent being, like, you know, if it's far enough back from the road, if it's not an issue, because many of the viewshed issues have been, I don't want to see that from the road, great. If you can show that it does, if you can convince the county council that it doesn't have a negative impact, cool. And I think that settles a lot of the conversation that has been happening, knowing it's something that could probably be revisited in the future, but gets us pretty darn far and gives the county council the information they need to make an informed decision.
My question would be, is the view shed gonna supersede that? In which case, it seems like maybe you just have a maximum height of 2 stories or 30 feet, unless you wanna go higher, and then you have to do the view shed, you know what I mean? Like if people are, you know.
I think that's included in what I said. So do the viewshed analysis for all developments and maximum development of that 30 feet, unless your viewshed analysis proves no impact, in which case you could potentially put something in front of the council to go higher and
What-
take either.
What she's
Leave it in
saying
there.
is you shouldn't have to have a view shed if you don't go above the 2 stories.
Oh, okay. I would be fine with that too.
Viewshed analysis.
I would be fine
And
with
then
that
after
too,
that,
but
it
it sounded like.
require, I mean, that's what I heard, is that what you said?
Yeah, yeah, if the view shed is not gonna supersede that, you know, what takes precedence, you know.
The
I,
view shed
I
is-
like the simpler approach of just saying, you know, here's what your standards are. If you want to go above it,
Me too.
you could, you know, conduct a view shed analysis, and the county council could approve up to 35 feet.
I'm comfortable with that.
I'd like to see a viewshed
Yeah.
analysis as part of any project. So that the county council can make an informed decision whether they're going to approve the overlay project or not.
That is a good point. So if those 2 stories are built in such a way that they're, let's see what you're saying.
Can we separate some of these though for like just straw polling? Because I feel like some of them were nesting and like.
I'm trying
Okay,
to
so
end
the
this.
last thing I think was Garish's modification of Zachariah's suggestion, which was everybody has to do a viewshed analysis because it's irrelevant to whether we want to approve the master plan or not. And also in general, you know, we allow 2-story buildings, and then if the viewshed analysis demonstrates it's not going to obstruct use too much, then it can go up to 35 feet. Is that sort of what you said?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. I think that's, sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Do you guys have that captured?
So,
Okay.
And if you want to tweak that, that's fine.
Yeah, I think we'll have something, I think we'll have enough to come back to you with.
So what's next after Heights?
I think we just go to the discussion of eligibility boundaries.
Good. Do we have maps to look at?
I'll put one up on the screen. It's just going to be a parcel map, I think, you know.
Or do we want to use this?
Sure, you can use that one as well. I'll put one up on the screen, and then we'll have that as well. And then don't let me forget that we need to discuss scheduling the public hearing. So we could also check that box real quickly before we go to the eligibility boundaries.
So, Emily, at our last meeting, you were, while Zachariah's pulling this up, you, what I took home from your conversation about the Spanish Valley Trail intersection with Highway 191 is that if it encouraged other uses, that you would be okay with allowing overnight accommodations there? Is that, did I dream that, or was that kind of where you were coming from?
I think the node I was talking about was Mill Creek and 191, where the university is going in.
Okay, good. good.
Is there more to that, or you were just trying to remember?
No, I
if
was trying to, no,
had
I was
my-
trying to remember,
Okay. Yeah.
because we have talked a little bit in general about where these nodes would be and where the polygons would be drawn and stuff. And in my mind, for some reason, I thought you were talking about Spanish Trail.
The node I find most critical to consider for incentivizing suburbanized development would be Mill Creek and 191. I think the secondary one that is potential is 191 and Spanish Trail up to Spanish Valley Road, that little development right there. And then I think the third that's been discussed, but I actually do not think we should consider as a node, is around the 313 and 191 area.
So my concern with Spanish Trail is that if the highest and best use for parcels near that intersection are going to be hotels or condominium units, that there's no way that somebody is going to actually build other types of, be able to afford to build other types of businesses there.
Yeah, I feel, I mean, and again, my reason for this thinking is more to do with existing development patterns in the county and with the university going in. You know, if you think about traffic flows in the county, for example, and there is some argument to be made for some sort of commercial zone that is outside of the city to keep people from having to go into the city of Moab for every single minor trip, right? It increases traffic, it increases congestion, air pollution, and so on. Speaking to the choir. So if you think about, you know, one, there's the question of parcel size. Is it likely that you will even see someone come to the county council with an application for a hotel in either of those two nodes? Haven't looked at it closely, but probably more in the Mill Creek area than in the Spanish Trail area, which means if you were to see overnight accommodations, you might logic that they might likely be smaller, more, you know, condo type or 2 to 3 things tied to some sort of commercial development. Again, this is speculation.
Yeah,
Like,
but
that's
my-
generally the
but
patterns
my
you tend to
question is,
see from
do you
that
think
sort of.
somebody that the development is contingent on a hotel going in for somebody to build another kind of business at
No,
one of those nodes?
because in those two nodes you already have existing development, I don't necessarily agree with the thinking that's been presented that you need to have a hotel to have development. There are maybe other places in the county where you're unlikely to see commercial development without a major anchor like a hotel, but I think with those two nodes, with the university, you have increased traffic, you have the, you know, reconstruction of the road at Mill Creek, you have the proximity to the city, so that's one place that you are already likely to see development. And I think the only other place where we see similar development patterns starting to coalesce is that Spanish Trail and 191. But there's nothing there that's like compelling, but you have the historical association, the dentist is out there, so that's to say in those areas you would need to have a hotel to have potential commercial use, potential foot traffic, potential, you know, commercialization, right?
So the node by the proposed university would be, you're saying that overnight accommodations aren't needed there because it's going to develop commercially without overnight accommodations.
That's true, but if you were to allow overnight accommodations there, thinking that that area, because of the parcel size, again, I haven't looked at it terribly close, that's where you start to say, all right, maybe we don't need mixed use in a giant hotel, because if somebody is going to open a small retail store, but they can have 1 or 2 apartments up top that they can rent to nightly renters, then that starts to offset the commercial development and make it more likely that you see a commercialized node. So that's where overnight accommodations do start to allow for that sort of commercial development, where otherwise the land cost right there might not be a place where somebody might invest in retail. So I don't know. Again, it's, you know, I've been listening as you've been discussing sort of the patterns you see of mixed use in other areas, and this is based off of
So
research in my mind that's likely very outdated. So.
I think on this question of eligibility districts, you know, we should think back to all the scoping we did at the beginning. And, you know, at that time, we had, you know, these option 3, which would, you know, allow development sort of both on north and south 191. There's what Landmark called option 4, which confined it to the north. And then eventually they added option 5 because many people thought option 4 was too permissive. And that's what we adopted, at least in the short term. And so I think, you know, sort of in this big picture, we're now considering some kind of retreat from option 5. We're allowing more things to be built. And I think the logical place to retreat to is something similar to Landmark's option 4. That's the one that had the second most support. I think there's also quite a lot of developments until things in the pipeline have been built and get a chance to see what that's like. Draw eligibility districts town. I think we might want to do that sometime in the future, and if we did, those nodes that are being discussed are probably logical places to do it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, Kevin, but I was just trying to get clarification from Emily whether building a hotel was necessary in order to encourage other commercial growth, because in my mind, if the highest and best use is a hotel, the land is going to be so expensive that guys can't build something else.
I don't think you should think of it as strictly hotel or no lodging.
That clarifies my comment. Sorry, Kenny. Came down to see the screen. I don't think you need to have a hotel to have additional types of growth. I think that there are types of overnight accommodations that if those zones are placed strategically throughout the county, can also incentivize other commercial areas and places where that kind of development is already being seen. That was my comment. But there's a very big difference to me between a parcel that could have some sort of commercial or retail space and a few overnight rentals and a 60,000 foot, 50,000 foot project.
So I think you need to be thinking, what does it take for a restaurant to survive? What does it take for a retail establishment to survive? What does it take for, an entertainment facility to survive? All of those places need patrons. And in order to have patrons, you need rooftops. And those rooftops don't have to be full-time residents. They can be a mixture of full-time residents and visitors. They can be visitors. Now, I do agree that, we are changing the dynamics of the land market to the point where it's a little bit unclear as to how all of this is going to play out, right? We know that we're changing the competition between lodging and non-lodging, certainly, but we don't, the sweet spot is going to be in the middle, in my opinion, rather than thinking about it in this binary. Personally, I do see a lot of potential for, a combination of lodging and other commercial uses between Mill Creek and city limits. This is a lot of land that is, really in effect should be part of the city. It's an extension of, the commercial business district, with the university going into this area right across from where Mill Creek Drive comes into the highway. You are going to see a lot of infill commercial development connecting this university node and what is currently our downtown business district.
Zachary, does that map show the existing, hotels and things?
No.
Campgrounds, condos, etc.?
This does not. I could pull that up, though.
I know, my thought is that, I'd like to see this map with the hotels pulled up, because, those hotels are there already. They are, they are the rooftops.
Right, but again, don't think just hotels or no lodging, right? It's not just hotels or campgrounds. Imagine 3 units of lodging. Imagine 10 units. Imagine, it's not just large-scale hotel development or nothing.
Well,
Okay, but I think that's based on a misunderstanding, or it seems to me to contradict some other things you've been saying. We all know that if you're, just consider the housing market. If you're buying a house and it's got a rental unit, or you're allowed to build a rental unit, then you're willing to pay more for that house. And that drives up prices for everyone, including people who don't want to, build an ADU or things like that. I think similarly, if we've got this land south of town, if you're allowed to put, a few rental units in it, that's going to make it more expensive, and it's going to make it more expensive for people who just want to do the restaurant and don't want to have to deal with that.
Well,
I think you've pointed out in the past that, when we were looking at it from the other way, that, some people just want to, in the mixed-use discussion, we decided not to require that because, just because someone wants to do an
Except
overnight
that it's
accommodation,
not
they
so-
don't want to.
it's not so guaranteed because it's no longer just a principal use or a use by right. So like somebody has to present why a mix of uses is more viable. And
I know,
the
I know
fact
it
of
isn't.
the matter is that like, with a rental, a residential rental, the range of what you can charge is so much smaller relative to, the range of potential rents you could charge on commercial activities.
But I think it still would affect prices in the same direction. And also, I think, even though technically, just because you're within an eligibility zone, that's no guarantee it's going to happen. I don't think buyers understand that. If you look at real estate ads in Moab over the last few months, they're really pushing, these HDH districts. They're
Sure.
saying, hey, you could apply to have 15 units an acre. And I think the buyers don't read the fine print that, well, maybe the quote will be used up by the time you apply, or maybe the council will say no. So I think just by drawing these boundaries, even if there's no guarantee, that's going to drive prices up. And I don't think I think we want commercial real estate prices to go down, not up.
And Zachariah, I think you made a good point that between Moab and the university, that is all going to be infilled with commercial development. So if it's going to be infilled with commercial development, why would there need to be an incentive of having any overnight accommodations to encourage them?
I wouldn't call it an incentive. I would just say, my personal feeling is that, a lot of developments could perform better if there were a combination of uses. That's why we have started talking about mixed uses. This is my opinion, and I think, what we can observe out in the world of, gateway and resort communities is like, some uses just fit together.
Could we be potentially looking at almost like with the HDHO where, say, that area between the college and downtown would have, instead of a 35 unit like room cap, have a 10 room cap or a 5 room cap, because that would maybe allow for the type of mixed use development that could benefit from some lodging units without it just being some backdoor to building a lodging business.
Well, certainly, yeah. You can differentiate the density and scale limitations based on geography. You absolutely could.
And because that appeals to me more. It kind of goes back to when we were talking about bed and breakfasts in neighborhoods. I personally was a proponent of allowing 2 bedrooms, owner lives on site, because I know a lot of people who are able to buy houses because they can Airbnb 2 of their rooms occasionally, and it's not a hotel. It's how they can kind of pay their mortgage. So I think that, I see parallels to this of you need a little bit of lodging to maybe help make something more financially viable, but limiting it such that it's not, the lodging doesn't become the primary use or the principal use, but is, a helper use. That's not a great term for it.
I would absolutely be in favor of that approach, and if there is the discussion of the option 4 with the likelihood of pushing overnight accommodation development north, that would be a rural area, so we already have this concept in what we're exploring.
You're right, yeah, maybe.
So urbanized node versus rural node, if you placed a standard on the urbanized node to say a maximum of whatever, 15,000 square foot project, now you start to get into that same kind of option. I really like that thinking.
Yeah, I just don't know that we have a crystal ball that's going to be able to say whether the commercial development that is predicted to happen along that corridor is going to happen with or without any additional overnight accommodations as an incentive to get the things done. I think the market is going to decide what the use is, and if the market doesn't have overnight accommodations as part of the mix of options, it's still going to be developed. But
If we built the concepts
I disagree.
into the code, and somebody who was building in that area between the city and Mill Creek came to the council with a proposal for some commercial development that also include 3 to 4 condos, they would have a mechanism then that the county council could consider adopting that into the urbanized overnight accommodation zone district, and then allowing them to go forward if they made a compelling case that I needed this
right,
also.
but I'm
So-
more concerned about land values. And as the affordable housing study showed, the biggest impediment to affordable housing in our community is the price of land. And if you're going to incentivize development of other commercial uses by maintaining the high value of land because they get to do overnight accommodations, I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
It seems like at a minimum, we should at least see what happens in some, without adding overnight accommodations into the mix. The complaint that we've heard over and over again is that commercial real estate is expensive and it only makes financial sense if you're building a hotel. And I think, putting these things in the mix, it's not as bad as just sort of allowing hotels, but it seems like a kind of an arithmetic, it's like a 2 + 2 = 5 error, not a error in values to me.
So let's start with this then. Where do you suppose we should draw eligibility boundaries? Instead of talking so much about where we shouldn't have them, let's hear some proposals about where we should.
I would say we should look at Thompson.
They're already there.
Well, that's right, they aren't excluded.
Yeah, I would say the north side of town. That's an area that's
So
already
where in the
toured.
county though? This is city limits.
Well, it's
So
mostly
you mean
within the
north of
city.
river?
Yeah, it could go north of the river, though I don't think, the city's part of the county. I don't think we
Well,
have
we're
to.
not going to dictate to the city where they
Okay.
put their eligibility boundaries.
Okay,
So let's
but-
just focus on unincorporated county.
Okay, but I think the city is on the road toward allowing additional hotels in that northern
So
corridor.
is what
And
you
I think
are
we could
saying
go
is that we
across the-
don't allow them anywhere?
No, I would say across the river and like the Paxman area would also make sense.
Okay, so your proposal is to draw an eligibility boundary around these parcels here?
Yes.
Okay, anywhere else?
I haven't thought about as much about like campgrounds up around 313, but I think, there's already things like that up there. I think it's sort of a separate discussion, so I'm reluctant to express an opinion. But I think within Spanish Valley, I think that area plus what the city's doing seems like enough for now.
Okay,
to me.
so that's one vote for basically applying the overnight accommodations overlay, having the potential to apply it to just like one of maybe 4 undeveloped parcels.
I don't know what the land ownership is there, but until you get to the Yumtra site, how many parcels are there?
1, 2, 3.
One of those was recently sold.
And I could see extending it, even though it's federal land, extending the overlay to include at least a portion of the Yumtra site.
Well, they're gonna sell it back to the city.
Yeah, that's,
Well, that's why I'm saying it. The future ownership of that is uncertain, but
Should be under the IHO.
not
Okay,
going, not going to.
so then there's another vote for including the UMTRA site. We're looking, maybe 20 years down the road.
Yeah, but at least show it on the map. But it wouldn't necessarily go that far off the highway. It would be a strip of land.
Okay, other thoughts?
Do you want to straw poll that now?
Sorry?
Should we just?
Well, we're just having a
identify-
discussion now.
Oh, okay, I just didn't know if you wanted to. I would be in favor of those recommendations.
So that's all flood sites too, right? Just say it.
I'm in favor of including that area, but not limiting it to that area exclusively.
So these highlighted parcels are where the overlays are to be applied.
And for clarification,
These are
red,
basically
green,
existing,
yellow.
this is all existing.
which one's
Um,
color?
So the green is like residential developments used for overnight accommodations. Red is the collection of hotels and motels. And yellow shows campgrounds.
Can you increase the time scale of that?
It's just all dynamic, so it'll change based on where we are.
Garish, to your concern around hotels, motels, and respecting that this is part of a bigger conversation, I would be interested in a discussion for overnight accommodation residential around the Mill Creek 191 junction. We have a university going in there. People are going to need to stay. Having smaller type development there, we already know people will be coming into town to visit, to stay. I'd rather have them there than driving through the city, and I think it would match to existing development patterns in the area. I think it provides, I think there's a compelling case for why that would be one place that could support the type of development and where it would actually make sense based off of existing development patterns.
I mean, that sort of makes sense if we're thinking, if we're definitely going to have more hotels, where should we put them? Is this a suitable area?
This isn't a hotel. I'm talking just
Or
residential.
other
Yeah.
residential, you mean like
So not hotel, motel, not
Condos.
RV campground.
rental
compounds,
condos?
Condos, apartments.
Okay, okay, sorry.
Things to that end, smaller scale.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it makes sense if you're, but, I guess the point I was going to make is that, there's this other question about just within the whole valley, how much, how many more tourist accommodations do we want? Do we think we don't have enough yet and we need a few more and let's find a place to put them? Or do we feel like maybe we have too much and we should limit them as much as we, practically can? And I think it's, closer to the latter.
Well, I would say that while I can't speak for the council, I think that some of you are trying to address a question that is not within your domain, meaning not that it's entirely outside your domain, but the county council has expressly stated they will allow new overnight accommodations somewhere in this community. So I don't think that it's that productive for us to limit our conversation to 4 parcels north of the river. So like,
Even though that's basically option 4, which was popular on the council?
well,
I mean, I'm very surprised by you
I
saying
can't
that.
speak for the council, and Jay Lynn, I would invite you to comment on this, but I am quite confident that there are going to be multiple council members who want to entertain, other areas for new development, be it mixed-use development, be it strictly lodging, and if this is where we get as the planning commission, that's great. The council will just take it up from there. But I think that this is an opportunity for you as planning commissioners to signal, if there's going to be some new lodging development, where is it most appropriate? And I guess that is, I as staff, we don't get to vote, right? So you all have to proactively take action on this matter, but I think it is incumbent upon staff to strongly advise you to go beyond just saying 4 parcels.
This 4 parcels plus all the stuff we already have, plus what's in the city, I think it's really misleading to characterize it as 4 parcels. One, I mean, that,
Well, but it is.
okay, in a technical sense, that's right, but I don't think that gives, the right skin. The other point I want to make is the last council meeting I recall where they went around and said what they would like to see. There were basically 5 votes for either option 4 or option 5 and 2 people who liked something closer to what you're proposing. So,
I mean, I don't have a definitive proposal. I'm just suggesting that I think that from a good planning perspective and thinking about, the type of growth and change that, has been communicated as being, at least somewhat desirable to many segments of the community, is that, there's a lot of potential for some mixed-use development between city limits, which are basically in purple, and where USU is going to go in. So all of this land along the highway, which is very low-density development right now, you could, there's a lot of conversation in the community about a desire for more restaurants, for more retail space, for more office space. Well, the fact of the matter is that those commercial uses perform better when there's a mix and there's a stream of patrons. And I just think that it's one thing to say, we want to limit the amount of new lodging that comes online. It's another to say we don't even want to entertain the potential for including some lodging uses with these other uses when it could be a great development. And so, again, establishing the eligibility boundaries doesn't guarantee that somebody who owns property in here gets the overlay applied, but it gives them an avenue to have a conversation with the county about a development that may happen to include lodging.
Sounds really good, Brian. Sounds like you're doing your job, and everybody should just say amen and let's go home.
So
Well, I
just
don't
sort of
think
a
it's that
side,
simple either, but
a side question. So what would be the mechanism for, we've just eliminated mixed uses from,
as a requirement.
as a requirement. So you're just saying that the council would show discipline and only approve things that had a relatively small number of overnight accommodation
I'm not
units?
saying that.
'Cause
I'm
we've
not
been
saying
talking
that
in
at all.
terms
I'm
of-
saying that, if somebody wanted to build a new restaurant in this area, and they had concerns about having enough activity at the restaurant, and they said, I could build a restaurant, and if I could build 4 more units, that would give me a lot more 4 nightly rentals, that would give me a lot more confidence of, in buying this property and building a restaurant space.
Yeah, so that's where I think.
Well, whatever the number might be, I'm
Okay.
just saying,
Yeah.
some of
So-
these
so
other
that's
uses
the
that
point.
we are desiring to have may
Okay.
become that much more viable
So,
if you allow some amount of lodging.
okay, so I think that I want to zero in on what you just said, because I think that's an area of fundamental disagreement, and it feels like it's, again, a more mathematical disagreement rather than a disagreement on values, what we want for the community. I think, if I'm going there and I want to build a restaurant, what I would hope is there aren't other people competing for the land driving the prices up. And so I think, certainly if we were going to allow hotels, we've seen what, that's the current situation. We know that drives prices up and people are complaining about that. And so what you're proposing is allowing just a little bit of that. You would be entertaining restaurants with, rental units above them or something like that. And that's still, I think that still drives prices up. And if instead we only allowed restaurants or stores, commercial, I think that makes them more viable because they're not having to compete.
Except that
Because-
even if the land prices are lower, it's going to take a long time for them to be so much lower that, like, the cash flow associated with the lodging,
We still have-
offsets the cost of the land at all. And so I guess what's important to note is that, like, let's say somebody comes in with a proposal to build, and I'm going to just keep throwing out this example. It doesn't really matter what the numbers are at this point.